trouble didn't start with the guns. It started the day a pair of strangers in reflective vests stepped onto my driveway, clipboards in hand, and announced they were compliance officers for the association. Fake badges gleamed on their chests, flimsy plastic, the kind you order online if you want to play cop in your backyard. But their tone carried weight, like they believed the uniforms granted them authority. I've been around long enough to recognize bluster from command. I spent years in uniform, living by discipline and protocol, trained to read intent in a man's stance, tone, and eyes. These two were not law enforcement. They were thugs wrapped in polyester, trying to pass themselves off as something more. And the way they eyed my garage told me exactly what they were after. I run a tight property. Lawn cut, hedges trimmed, driveway clear. My flag hangs folded crisp, a salute to order. Inside, my garage holds memories and tools of another life, secured, lawful, and none of their concern. Yet the moment they started circling the doors, their chatter slipping toward inventory checks and storage violations, I knew this wasn't a routine gripe. This was an attempt to pry into my life with force disguised as rules. The letters had come first. Notes slipped under my door with talk of community compliance, warnings about unauthorized storage, veiled remarks about firearms safety. They escalated into fines, never official, never signed by anyone with authority beyond a board of neighbors playing sheriff. I documented everything, photographs, dates, voice recordings. I wasn't naive. I knew their game. Neighbors whispered, some sympathetic, others avoiding eye contact when the subject came up. One muttered, "They've been watching you." Another hinted the board had special arrangements with certain security types. But when I pressed, everyone clammed up. Fear spreads quicker than truth in a neighborhood that bends to intimidation. I tightened security. Extra lights, upgraded cameras, cloud backups. Motion sensors covered blind spots. I told my daughter to keep the doors locked, to call the sheriff if anyone in a vest came knocking. She humored me with a roll of her eyes, but she understood. I've seen what happens when people pretend uniforms equal authority. It never ends well for the ones who comply without question. The shift came in the details. Cars slowing as they passed my driveway. HOA officers lingering too long at the property line. The way the so-called compliance men began walking with radios clipped to their belts like they wanted to look tactical. Their presence wasn't about safety, it was about pressure, control. At the next association meeting, I brought the stack of evidence. Letters, false fines, timestamps from the cameras. I presented it all. The board sat in their fold-up chairs, stiff and smug, while the president leaned forward with a smirk. "We're concerned about community safety," he said. "Weapons stored improperly put us all at risk. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a warning. And I knew then they were coming for more than citations. I've been trained to recognize escalation. When authority cloaks itself in lies, the next step is force. I didn't want confrontation, but I wasn't about to be caught unprepared. I called Marcus, an old friend from my unit. He's the kind of man who sleeps light, who knows how to move in silence and spot angles no one else sees. Together we walked the property, adjusted cameras, repositioned lighting. He insisted on a hidden lens pointed directly at the garage door. "They'll test this first," he said. We laughed about it, called it paranoia. But both of us knew the truth. You don't prepare unless you sense something coming. And everything in my bones told me the night wasn't far off when they'd try to force their way in. I thought cameras and paperwork would be enough. I thought exposing their bluff would make them back down. But I was wrong. The real fight hadn't started yet. It was a Wednesday evening when the knock came, sharp and deliberate, like someone trying to announce not just arrival, but dominance. I glanced at the clock. Too late for delivery, too early for a neighborly drop-in. The motion sensor chimed on my phone a second later, and I pulled up the camera feed. 4 men stood on my porch. Reflective vests, radios clipped to their belts. The same flimsy badges I'd seen before. But this time there was a different edge to their posture. They weren't pretending to be friendly. They were trying to look official, tactical even. Marcus was with me that night, sitting at the kitchen table, sipping coffee while we reviewed the footage from the new garage camera. I tilted the phone toward him, and he raised an eyebrow, slow and deliberate, like a man confirming what he already suspected. The knock came again, harder. One of the men leaned toward the doorbell cam, flashing his fake badge. "Association enforcement," he said, his tone clipped, practiced. "We need access to your garage. Immediate compliance required." My jaw tightened. They were saying the quiet part out loud now. I didn't answer. Instead, I checked the other feeds. The driveway camera showed another man circling toward the garage, flashlight in hand. Marcus noticed too, his eyes narrowing. "They're flanking," he muttered. It wasn't paranoia. It was protocol. We moved without speaking, years of muscle memory guiding our steps. I opened the small safe tucked away in the pantry. 2 service pistols rested inside, clean and ready. My fingers worked on instinct, slide, check, chamber, safety. One went into my hand, the other I tucked at the small of my back. Marcus armed himself with the calm ease of someone who's done it 1,000 times. We killed the interior lights. The cabin dropped into shadow, firelight from the living room flickering just enough to paint us in silhouettes. Outside, boots scraped against gravel. The metallic clang of tools followed, the unmistakable sound of a pry bar against steel. "They're on the garage," Marcus said quietly. I moved to the back feed. Sure enough, 2 of them were crouched by the garage door, prying and forcing, while the others stayed near the porch. One muttered something that the mic barely caught. "Check the racks. He's got unregistered weapons in there. HOA wants them seized." The words burned hotter than any flame. They weren't bluffing anymore. They were declaring intent. I motioned to Marcus. We both drew our weapons, holding them low and out of sight. No theatrics, no adrenaline spikes, just deliberate calm. We advanced through the hallway, steps silent, breathing steady. Every move felt like a drill, like slipping back into deployment mode. My hand brushed the wall as we passed, grounding myself in the familiar grain of the wood. The noise at the garage grew louder, steel shrieking under pressure. My pulse slowed, not sped. That's the trick of training. Where fear should sit, protocol takes over. I checked the feet again, noting their positions, calculating angles, exits, timing. Marcus leaned close, whispered just enough for me to catch. "We control the interior. Don't let them dictate the pace." Another bang rattled the house. The frame of the garage door buckled slightly, paint cracking under the force. The porch men radioed back, asking for status. The reply was muffled but clear. "Almost through. Almost through into my garage." Almost through into a place that wasn't theirs to touch. I thought about my daughter, about what would have happened if she'd been home alone. I thought about the smug faces at the board meeting, smiling as they said community safety. And I thought about the oath I once swore. The training drilled into me, the instinct to defend. This wasn't about petty HOA politics anymore. This was a breach, a violation. A line crossed. Marcus and I exchanged a glance. No words, no need. We moved toward the garage entrance, pistols ready but low, every step precise. The firelight behind us stretched our shadows long across the floorboards. Soldiers again in a fight we hadn't chosen, and in that moment, I knew whatever happened next would not end quietly. The first splinter cracked off the garage frame like a rifle shot. My cameras caught the sparks from metal grinding against steel, the sound tearing through the house as if they meant to rip the place down to its bones. I could see them clearer now on the feed. 2 men in their knockoff uniforms, crouched low, shoulders straining as they pried. Their radios hissed with static, a voice barking orders. "Get it open. Secure the weapons. Weapons. My weapons. Legal, locked, documented." They weren't after safety. They were after control. Marcus stood beside me in the darkened hallway, his pistol steady in his grip, his breathing level. The firelight from the living room cast his face in sharp lines, eyes narrowed, jaw tight. We didn't need to talk. We had both been here before. Different continent, different mission, same tension building in the air. Another slam. The garage door buckled inward, one hinge screeching in protest. My cameras caught the reflection of one man's grin, teeth flashing in the dim light like he thought victory was a certainty. That was their first mistake. I shifted my weight, training kicking in. Situational awareness, entry points, lines of fire. If they breached the garage, their focus would be inside, not above. That bought us seconds. Seconds were everything. Marcus tapped my shoulder, a silent cue. He'd take left, I'd take right. We moved low, backs close to the wall, advancing toward the connecting door. My heart didn't pound. It steadied, calm under pressure. That's what years of command builds into you. Outside, one of the porchmen circled to the side window, cupping his hands to peer in. The glow from the fireplace must have thrown him off. He pulled back, muttering into his radio. My hidden lens caught the detail. He was armed. Not a sidearm issued by police. A civilian pistol tucked sloppily at his belt. Another layer of their lie exposed. The radio crackled again. 2 minutes. Make it quick, I clenched my jaw. 2 minutes until what? Backup? Reinforcements? Or worse, an escalation they weren't trained to handle. The metallic wrench gave way to a deafening crack. The bottom panel of the garage door tore loose, light spilling inside from their flashlights. Shadows jumped across the concrete floor as they shoved their tools deeper. One voice whispered, "Almost in." That was it. No more waiting. No more bluff. I raised my pistol, cold steel pressing against my palm, and unlocked the interior door leading into the garage. Marcus mirrored me, his posture low, controlled. The smell of cold metal and oil wafted in as the door creaked open, just enough for us to slip through. The scene hit like a snapshot. 2 men crouched at the door, pry bar wedged deep, their reflective vests glowing under flashlight beams. Another man stood by the driveway, scanning nervously, hand brushing his radio. None of them expected resistance. None of them expected me. Stand down. My voice cut through the chaos, low but commanding, the kind of tone that doesn't ask, it orders. The men froze for half a second. Then one snarled, "Association enforcement. This property is in violation. Step aside, violation." That word again. Paper shields for unlawful actions. Marcus raised his pistol just enough for the firelight from inside to catch the steel. Not aimed, not reckless, just visible. A statement. His silence was louder than any threat. For a beat, the air held still. Then one of the fake officers lunged, trying to wrench the pry bar free. My training screamed through me. Control the situation, never let them dictate pace. I stepped forward, pistol raised fully now, voice harder. Drop the tools. "Walk away," the man froze mid-motion. His flashlight beam jittered across the garage floor, landing on the gun in my hand. His bravado slipped, replaced with a flicker of doubt. That flicker was all I needed. Marcus shifted, covering the second man, his eyes sharp, his stance rock solid. Together we formed a line, not just of defense, but of authority. The real kind. Their radios hissed again, the voice on the other end impatient. "Status?" The men didn't answer. They couldn't. They were caught. But I knew hesitation wouldn't last. Bullies like this never back down on their own. They push until they're forced to stop. And I was prepared to make sure this ended on my terms, not theirs. The silence stretched like a tripwire. Every second felt loaded, the kind of pause before chaos erupts. I kept my stance steady, pistol trained, eyes locked on the man gripping the pry bar. His knuckles whitened, sweat cutting through the grit on his forehead. The others shifted nervously, radios crackling, the voice on the other end demanding, "Report, now." Marcus didn't flinch. He held his aim low but ready, his presence alone enough to cut through their false bravado. We'd faced men like this before, the kind who confuse intimidation with authority, the kind who crumble when confronted with real resistance. Finally, one of them found his voice. "You're obstructing association enforcement." "This is a violation," I almost laughed. Violation, their favorite word. But my tone stayed flat, firm. "You're trespassing. You're armed. And you're done here." The man with the pry bar hesitated, his eyes flicking between my weapon and Marcus's unshakable stance. The flashlight beam trembled in his grip. Behind him, the porch guard shifted uneasily, hand-brushing that illegally holstered pistol like a gambler unsure whether to double down or fold. I caught the detail, noted the twitch, and spoke louder, deliberately, for the camera feed recording every second. "Sheriff has all your faces, all your plates. This ends now, or it ends with you in cuffs." For a breath, I thought they might break. But then the radio flared again, a different voice, colder, sharper. "Proceed. Do not leave until secured. They're orders." Someone higher up in the board, pulling strings, feeding them lines like a cheap playbook. And that voice, calm, confident, wasn't just some neighbor on a power trip. It was someone who believed they had the weight to push me into submission. Marcus met my eye, the silent question clear. How far do we let this go? Before I could answer, the man at the driveway moved. Quick, desperate. His hand went for the pistol at his belt, fumbling under the weight of nerves and sweat. Training took over. I dropped my aim, sharp and deliberate, and barked one command that cut through the night. Freeze! The word hit like a thunderclap. He froze mid-draw, hands stiff, chest rising fast. Marcus shifted, pivoting like clockwork to cover the others, his voice low and even. Bad move. Don't try again. The garage filled with tension so thick it felt like the air had weight. I could hear the night sounds outside, the chirp of crickets, the rustle of leaves, and beneath it, the hum of adrenaline pounding through veins. The man with the pry bar finally broke. His grip loosened, the tool clattering onto the concrete with a hollow ring. We were told this was authorized, he stammered, his voice cracking under the weight of the lie unraveling. I didn't lower my weapon. Not yet. By who? He glanced at the others, waiting for backup that never came. The porch guard stayed frozen, sweat dripping down his temple. The second man near the door avoided eye contact, shoulders slumping like the fight had drained out of him. Board president, the first man muttered. Said you had unregistered guns. Said we had authority to seize them. There it was. The thread of their whole illusion pulled loose in one shaky confession. Marcus leaned forward slightly, his words quiet but razor-sharp. You think fake badges and a clipboard give you that authority? You have no idea what you just walked into. I let the silence sit after that, let the weight of reality settle on them. Then, slow and deliberate, I took a step closer. My pistol stayed steady, my tone unwavering. Pick up your tools. Pick up your radios. And get off my property, now. They didn't argue. They didn't posture. They gathered their gear with fumbling hands, backing toward the driveway like men retreating from a fight they hadn't signed up for. The porch guard kept his hands high, his weapon untouched, his eyes darting toward the cameras as if realizing just how damning the footage would be. The last one out lingered for a second, his face pale under the vest. You'll regret this, he muttered, though the threat rang hollow. Then they were gone, melting into the night with their radios crackling, their fake authority collapsing behind them. Marcus finally lowered his pistol, exhaling slow. They'll be back, he said. I nodded, sliding my weapon back to safety. Then we'll be ready, because this wasn't the end. This was the opening move, and they'd just learned I don't play by their rules. The quiet after they left wasn't peace. It was the kind of silence that comes before a storm. I stood in the garage, pistol still warm in my hand, listening to the echoes of their retreating footsteps. The smell of cold metal lingered, mixed with the faint bite of oil and dust stirred up from their struggle. My cameras kept recording, the lenses unblinking, capturing every angle of their shameful withdrawal. Evidence, proof, ammunition for the real fight that was coming. Marcus leaned against the frame of the door, arms crossed, his expression unreadable in the flickering glow from the firelight spilling into the garage. That wasn't random, he said, his voice calm but edged with certainty. They didn't just decide to come here tonight. Someone's orchestrating this. I didn't need convincing. The false badges, the radios, the arrogance. It was all too deliberate. This wasn't an impulsive raid. It was planned, sanctioned by a board that thought ownership meant power, that thought intimidation could rewrite the law. I walked deeper into the garage, the concrete cool beneath my boots. My eyes fell on the door they'd nearly torn apart, its frame bent and scarred. They had meant to breach it completely, to drag my property out like thieves in the night and call it enforcement. The image of their smug confidence replayed in my mind, and my jaw tightened. This wasn't about the guns, I finally said, my voice low. That was just the excuse. They want the cabin. Marcus's eyes flicked toward me, sharp, assessing. He didn't question it. He didn't have to. We both knew greed when we saw it, the cabin. My father's legacy, perched at the edge of the lake, older than the subdivision that now tried to swallow it whole. He had built it with his own hands, each log placed with the kind of patience only years of hard labor could teach. And when he died, it passed to me, untouchable, rooted in deeds that stretched back generations. But to the board, it wasn't history. It was opportunity. A piece of land they couldn't own, right on the lake they wanted to control. And tonight had proved how far they were willing to go to get it. Marcus pushed off the doorframe, his boots clicking against the concrete as he stepped closer. So what's the next move? I looked at the bent door, the faint marks of pry bars, the scattered tools left in their rush to flee. My cameras had it all. Every second, every face, every word. But evidence alone wasn't enough. People like this twisted truth, buried facts under paperwork and intimidation. If I wanted to protect what was mine, I had to take the fight to them. They think they've cornered me, I said slowly. But they've forgotten one thing. Marcus raised a brow. What's that? I turned toward him, the firelight catching the edge of my expression. I don't just own the cabin. I own the lake. The words hung in the air, heavy, undeniable. That deed, the one my father had guarded so fiercely, wasn't just for the cabin. It covered the water itself, a boundary written in ink long before the HOA ever existed. They thought they could bully me off the land, but the lake was mine. Every ripple, every shoreline, and with that ownership came leverage. Real leverage. I felt a calm settle over me, the kind that comes when the path forward is clear. They had struck first, but they had overplayed their hand. They had revealed their desperation, and now I would use the one truth they couldn't erase to dismantle their illusion of control. Marcus must have seen the shift in my stance, the steadiness in my voice. He gave a short nod, his mouth curving into the faintest trace of a grin. Then it's time to remind them who they're really dealing with. The fire in the house popped, sending sparks up the chimney. Outside, the night stretched quiet, but I knew it wouldn't last. The board would regroup, plan again, send someone else. They thought they had resources. They thought they had authority, but they didn't have the lake. And as I locked the garage door behind me, I knew this wasn't just about defense anymore. It was about taking the fight back to them, on ground they couldn't claim, on water they couldn't touch. This was no longer their game. It was mine. The board never recovered from that night. Not really. They held meetings, shuffled paperwork, tried to project the same authority they once wielded like a weapon, but it was hollow now. People had seen too much. They'd watched 4 grown men with fake badges and trembling hands retreat from one house they thought would be easy prey. They'd heard the lies unravel on camera. They'd seen the sheriff arrive not to cuff me, but to cuff the illusion the board had built around themselves. What they didn't realize, what they never seemed to understand, was that they'd given me the one thing I needed most: clarity. Before, it had been personal. Petty fines, veiled threats, intimidation dressed up as rules. But when they tried to breach my garage, when they came for my guns under the guise of authority, they crossed into my world. Military protocol isn't about muscle or bluster. It's about preparation, about discipline, about patience sharpened to a blade. And once they forced me into that mindset, there was no undoing it. I doubled down. Cameras, redundancies, legal filings, public exposure. Every move they made was now documented, time-stamped, filed, and backed up. Every attempt to posture became a liability for them. Neighbors who once kept their heads down began stopping me at the mailbox, asking questions, sharing their own stories. Fear turned into quiet defiance, and little by little, the board's empire of paper cuts and intimidation bled itself dry. The men who had stood in my driveway that night never came back. 2 quit the board entirely. 1 sold his house and disappeared. The so-called president who ordered the raid found herself under investigation, first by the county, then by the state. Titles and smug grins don't mean much when you're sitting across from investigators with subpoenas in hand. As for me, life settled back into its rhythm, but with edges sharper than before. The garage was repaired, the cabin stood firm, and the lake remained mine in every legal sense. My father's deed, the same one they thought they could ignore, became my shield and my proof. Every time I walked down to the dock, I felt that quiet satisfaction of knowing the water they coveted was untouchable. Marcus stayed a while, helping me shore up defenses, but eventually he left with a handshake and a grin. Satisfied we'd held the line without firing a shot. Protocol worked, he said simply, and he was right. The lesson in all of it is one I hope others hear. Bullies thrive on silence. They push until someone pushes back, and when that push comes with discipline, evidence, and the will to stand your ground, their power crumbles. HOA, board, or anyone else, authority without legitimacy is just theater. And theater collapses the second the audience stops clapping. I didn't go looking for a fight. But when it came to my door, I was ready. And now, the cabin, the lake, and the quiet mornings I've earned remain exactly where they belong. With me, because some things aren't just property, they're legacy, and no false badge or cheap threat can ever take that away.